Ah yes, it is once again the best time of the year, when the nights begin to get longer, and there is a chill in the air that signifies the fast approaching winter solstice. A reminder of the inevitable death and rebirth that occurs all around us. Autumn has a way of conjuring up both a cultural and natural energy that feels almost palpable at times. And what better way to embrace the festivities and channel my love for the season than through the wonderful medium of retro gaming. My obscure Sega Genesis Gems video seemed to get some decent feedback, so I figured it made sense to move over to Nintendo's 16-bit machine and see what the Super Nintendo had to offer in terms of horror-themed games. Keep in mind that horror was much different in the early 90s, and the legendary survival horror franchises Resident Evil and Silent Hill were still a couple of years away. It makes sense to consider horror more as a subgenre or theme at this point in time, seeing as the games being discussed here all fall into a major gameplay category such as shooter or platformer. Even though Nintendo is usually perceived as somewhat of a family-friendly company, the SNES definitely had its fair share of more mature-themed titles. After all, both Doom and Mortal Kombat had versions on the console, even if the first MK did require a code to show the blood. It was also home to many other well-known games that could be labeled as horror, like Super Castlevania IV, Castlevania Dracula X, Super Metroid, Zombies Ate My Neighbors, Shadowrun, Super Ghouls and Ghosts, and Clock Tower. There were also those that pulled from books, TV, and movies, such as Jurassic Park and The Addams Family. I want to really dive deep into the Super Nintendo library though, and give an overview of 3 specific, lesser talked about horror games. These 3 aren't necessarily considered highly unknown or obscure by any means, but in my experience they are not as popular as most of those previously mentioned, and at the very least I would call them underrated, though your mileage may vary. In my process of these playthroughs, I also came across some games that I would overall probably not recommend. So in order to maintain the balance of the universe, for every game that I recommend, I will first briefly mention one that I would likely avoid. So lock the doors, turn out the lights, and strap yourself in. It's time to see what the Super Nintendo has to offer us this Halloween season. First up, we are taking a look at the extremely underwhelming and rather boring Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. In the words of the angry video game nerd,
"It's alive! It's alive! How about it's ass? It's ass!"
This game is based on the 1994 Kenneth Branagh movie, which in itself is based on the classic 1818 Frankenstein novel by Mary Shelley. It tries to follow the source material, but it doesn't translate well, and this is a case where I think they tried too hard to keep in line with the movie instead of just focusing on making a good game. You follow the Frankenstein monster throughout the various stages, and the main issue here is just how awful this guy controls. He is clumsy, slow, and has atrocious aim with that goofy little stick of his. On top of all of this, there are no power-ups or alternate weapons as far as I know, and very few items to collect. You do have the ability to fire electrical balls at enemies, but it can only be done if you are above 50% health, and it drains some of your health anyway when you use it, so what's the point? I hate it when abilities do that in games, especially in this one, because you will most definitely need as much of your life bar as you can get. The combat and hitboxes are just awful, and you will be struggling to make it through any of the levels. I also don't really like the confusing stage layouts, and how some of the pathways lead to absolutely nowhere. If I had to say some good things about this game, some of the environments and backgrounds look okay I guess, even if the graphics themselves are pretty bad. I do like how the lighting effects work in the dark areas. In the end though, it just felt boring and slow, and I had no desire to try and complete it. I wound up using passwords to see some of the later levels, because I just couldn't be bothered to play all the way through it, and this is something I will rarely do. I think you are much better off reading the book or seeing the movie with this one. We are continuing on now to a much better game, Ghoul Patrol. For those of you who are unaware, this is the direct and official sequel to Zombies Ate My Neighbors, which happens to be one of my all-time favorite games. I am a bit embarrassed to admit that I actually had no idea this game even existed until fairly recently, but I blame it on the fact that I owned a Sega Genesis, not a Super Nintendo as a kid, and this was an exclusive release, even though Zombies wasn't. Not to mention that the title Ghoul Patrol gives no indication that it is at all related. Ghoul Patrol does an amazing job of maintaining that quirky, mid-90s, Saturday morning cartoon vibe that the original Zombies stood out so much for. Everything from the graphics to the environments and music is right in line with what you would expect out of a Zombies Ate My Neighbors continuation. It once again follows the adventures of Zeke and Julie, as the two travel to an exhibition at the library entitled Ghosts and Demons of the Dark Ages. As you can guess, things go south when they accidentally summon an evil demon who plans to take over all of the time dimensions using his minions. The gameplay doesn't change too much and is another top-down perspective run-and-gun shooter. There is a whole selection of new and wacky weapons and items to collect along the way. While there aren't nearly as many levels as in Zombies, it is still a decently long game, and the overall variety in environments is pretty great. The level layouts don't seem quite as confusing or maze-like as in the first, but there are still lots of hidden areas and side rooms to explore as you attempt to locate and save all of the neighbors. I had fun just walking around and taking in all of the little details in the levels. They did a great job here. One change they made that I wasn't a fan of though, was the replacement of the radar with these annoying speech bubbles that come in from off-screen in the direction of the person speaking. It ends up confusing me more than helping, and I would really just prefer a radar. They also added a run function, but it's somewhat awkward and the overall movement and shooting mechanics feel like a step down from the previous game, though not by much. My favorite change is that when you drink the red potion, instead of transforming into a lumbering beast like in Zombies, you now change into the Grim Reaper. Though it is not quite as good as Zombies Ate My Neighbors, Ghoul Patrol is still a very worthy sequel and comes highly recommended from me, especially if you enjoyed Zombies or you are looking for a good cooperative experience. While I am on the topic of Zombies Ate My Neighbors sequels, I wanted to quickly mention that there are some very high quality ROM hacks for Zombies that I would also suggest checking out if you like these types of games. In particular, I can vouch for Oh No, More Zombies Ate My Neighbors by Stanley Decker and Doomsday 1 and 2 by Zombie 101. I will be sure and drop a link in the video description to a page with all of these and more. Switching gears back to another game that I would suggest avoiding, I will briefly highlight Bram Stoker's Dracula. Just like its partner in crime from earlier, Frankenstein, this game also tries to capitalize on the success of an early 90s movie, strangely another Francis Ford Coppola one, that is once again itself based on a classic novel from the 1800s. I'm noticing a pattern here. It was released on just about every console that was out, and mostly all of them were mediocre side-scrollers. While the graphics for the Sega CD version were actually pretty impressive for the time, the same cannot be said for the Super Nintendo one. I am not much of a fan of the caricatured and somewhat cartoony style. It just doesn't work here like it does with a game such as Ghoul Patrol. You take control of Jonathan Harker as he traverses the 6 various levels inspired by the source material in an attempt to defeat Dracula. Before the exit can appear in each stage, You must first locate Van Helsing, who provides a specialty weapon for you to use if you're able to find it. There is an arrow on your HUD which directs you where to go at all times, but it's generally not necessary as the majority of the levels are short and to the point. The worst part about this game though is just how bad the controls in combat are. It feels too floaty and the hitboxes lead to you getting hit way more than you should. There also seems to be virtually no time in between the instances of damage received, and no invulnerability recovery moment, meaning it's easy to quickly lose massive amounts of health on one obstacle. You are mostly limited to just swinging your sword and jumping around, considering that the specialty weapons are in short supply and unique to specific levels. There are some bosses along the way, but they are laughably bad, with no AI whatsoever to speak of. Strategy is pointless, and it seems like the best way to go about beating them is to just mindlessly button mash and hope to take them out before you die. It's a shame because there is definitely an outline of a solid game here underneath all of the flaws and technical shortcomings. Most of the music and sound effects are great and help to create an eerie gothic atmosphere. Bram Stoker's Dracula is what I would call a case of so close and yet so far. So as before, just stick to the book or movie. Next up is Warlock. Now this is one of the main games I wanted to talk about, and it might come as a surprise to those familiar with it that I included it in a recommended slot. I had briefly heard of this game long ago, and noticed some pretty bad reviews, so I didn't even bother playing it. This year though, I wanted to give it a try since I was looking for obscure horror material, and I'd say it definitely fits that description. Maybe it's because I was expecting it to be one of the worst games on the Super Nintendo, but it pleasantly surprised me, especially with its nice looking graphical environments and unique gameplay style. I will warn you though, this game is definitely not for everyone, and some people might actually hate it due to the way the main character controls. The basic idea is to play as a druid hero and collect various runes scattered around the globe in order to prevent an evil warlock from wielding an ultimate power. Pretty basic stuff as far as the story goes, but where it stands out is in the way you must control the druid. From a physical standpoint, he is rather weak and awkward, so you need to utilize a magic orb and cast spells in order to overcome the opposition. The orb that you control follows different pathways depending on the direction you aim it. It can damage enemies as well as grab items for you. This is good because there are lots of hidden areas and items placed in spots that only the orb can reach. For some reason, having this sort of telekinetic-like ability is extremely appealing to me and makes for some rewarding gameplay that I was not expecting. The combat is fairly clunky, but if you go into it realizing you need to slow down and take more of a siege-like approach, you will have better results. Just know that you will get hit a lot, and I must admit that at times it does get extremely frustrating and kind of ridiculous like in the bad games already mentioned. I feel like this is somewhat made up for though, by the fact that you have a very large health meter, and there are also many healing items and spells scattered throughout the levels that you can collect. Try to remember that you are a druid, and that your physical prowess is limited. Also think of your health pool as more of a resource that you must spend in order to succeed. In addition to your orb, you have a magic blast that ends up being your main form of damage, as well as various spells that you can find and use, some of which are pretty awesome. As I mentioned earlier, I think that the enemies and graphics are great to look at and create environments that I enjoy exploring. Not to mention, some of the organ music in other original tracks sound amazing. Apparently there is also a version of this game released on the Sega Genesis, and some people much prefer it to the SNES one, so maybe I'll have to give it a try sometime. Even though I don't really consider Warlock to be a great game, or even a good game for that matter, I would still call it underrated and recommend it to the select few of you who are patient and like what they see here. Moving on to the final title that I would suggest avoiding, we have Nosferatu. It was not my intention to only include movie-based horror games on my not recommended list. Good ones are just few and far between. I actually had high hopes for this game, with it taking inspiration from what is quite possibly the most influential horror movie of all time. In addition, some of the original reviews were somewhat decent, and the initial presentation, graphics, and animations are all pretty good. After playing for a bit though, you soon realize that this game suffers from similar problems to others in this video. The controls in combat just do not work right. It seems like they were trying to implement a beat-em-up style system, but inside of a precision platformer that acts a bit like a scuffed Prince of Persia. The other subpar games on this list lack combat depth, but Nosferatu seriously overcomplicates everything. Just take a look at the moves list in the instruction manual. This is all you get too, no additional power-ups or any weapons in the entire game. Maybe this system would make sense if they actually programmed more than a single button to use for attacking. It's mind-boggling to me when there are plenty of unused buttons on the Super Nintendo controller that we have to try and perform these awkward moves using the D-pad, one button for attacking, one button for jumping, and that's it. It's also not a case of it being ported from a console with fewer buttons either, as this was a SNES exclusive, so I'm really at a loss. The environments look decent enough, but it turns tedious fast with all of the annoying traps and precise platforming that is required. In addition, everything starts appearing the same with little variety in visuals or level layouts. The stage progression is also strange and leads to me getting lost at times. Yet another example of something they should have simplified. The boss fights could have been okay, but due to the awful combat and unresponsive controls, they wind up just being a frustrating mess. The music is a mixed bag and ranges from decent to unacceptable, with some of the later tracks being no more than an annoying loop. There might be a small minority of you out there who find some enjoyment with Nosferatu, but if your tastes are at all like mine, I just can't recommend it in good faith. Rounding out the list with our last entry, we have another Super Nintendo exclusive, Demon's Crest. If there was only a single game I could recommend in this video, it would have to be this one. Even though Demon's Crest has been on my radar for a while now, and it used to be fairly well known, I only just recently beat it for the first time. I would usually turn to games like Super Castlevania 4 or Super Ghouls and Ghosts when I had the itch to play a fantasy horror platformer. I am glad I broke that cycle though, because Demon's Crest is just oozing with substance and style. You take control of the powerful red gargoyle demon, Firebrand, the same character from the Gargoyles Quest games and an enemy in the Ghosts and Goblins series. As Firebrand, your goal is to navigate the demon realm and locate 6 magical elemental crests that have been stolen from you by a rival demon. Combining these 6 crests summons the Crest of Infinity, which can grant infinite power to the wielder. You start out with the ability to breathe fireballs, cling to walls, and hover in the air indefinitely. Each time you find a crest, Firebrand will gain new powers and learn to transform into a gargoyle type, such as ground gargoyle or aerial gargoyle. The controls are smooth and responsive, and it feels good to use the different forms and abilities according to the situation at hand. In addition, the boss fights are extremely rewarding and seem well tuned difficulty-wise. A couple of them were pretty tough and took me a while to complete, but learning their patterns and figuring out which gargoyle forms to use went a long way towards succeeding. In true Metroidvania fashion, once you have acquired new abilities, you can then backtrack to previous levels in order to find secret items and bosses which were not accessible beforehand. Furthermore, there are also some light RPG elements present, such as there being a variety of different spells and potions to purchase from shops using the money you collect from enemies. There is also an overworld map screen where you can travel to and from these shops in the various levels. Other items to collect include extra hit points, flasks and spell vellums for using consumable magic items, and talismans that can improve Firebrand's abilities. One unfortunate drawback is how incredibly short the game is. There are only around 5 main levels, and even though each level is then divided into multiple sub-stages, most of these can be completed pretty quickly and without needing to backtrack. I actually thought when I beat the final boss that I was just finishing the first world and still had a good bit of game ahead of me. Luckily, this is somewhat made up for by just how much replayability there is with this game. In addition to the varying gargoyle forms and special items that make for different playthroughs each time, there are also multiple endings that can be achieved, including a secret one, based on certain gameplay choices. Overall, Demon's Crest is a great example of a retro horror-themed side-scroller that has just about everything going for it. The boss fights are epic, the graphics are gorgeous, the music is haunting, the controls are intuitive, and the gameplay is diversified. If it wasn't for the short length, it would likely be considered among the best games on the system. Check it out. And there we have it, a taste of what the Super Nintendo has to offer in terms of underrated horror games. Some of them good, some of them bad, and some middle of the road. These are of course my own preferences, and at the end of the day, I think all of them have some sort of redeeming qualities to them, and none of them are perfect. Hopefully I provided enough information to give you an idea of which ones you might enjoy checking out. There are definitely many other SNES gems out there that could be considered horror that I haven't yet mentioned, such as Blackthorn, Musha, the classic Japanese tale of horror, and Out of This World, among others. But I wanted to cover these examples in particular as they were all new to me this year and fresh in my mind. Let me know if you'd like to see a follow-up video covering the ones I missed, or maybe some of the Japanese horror exclusives. If you are interested in playing some of these games, but you are unsure where to begin, check out my RetroArch tutorials on the channel to get started. You can also occasionally catch me streaming at twitch.tv/Watsonator, so come say hello. Now I am dying to get back to my playthrough of the new Silent Hill 2 remake, so with that, I thank you for watching,
and happy Halloween. Yeah.